The world outside of Eden was vast, untamed, and heartbreakingly silent. The constant warm presence of God, which had been the very air Adam and Eve breathed, was gone. Now there was only a hollow echo, a memory of a perfect garden they could never re-enter. Adam's hands, once accustomed to gently tending paradise, became calloused from tilling stubborn soil. Eve, who had walked and talked with celestial beings, now felt the sharp sting of thorns and the weary ache of a life defined by struggle. In their eyes, you could see the lingering shadow of paradise lost, a deep, persistent sorrow. Yet, into this world of toil and memory, a new sound emerged, the cry of a newborn. They named him Cain, which meant to acquire or to get, for Eve said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." He was the first human born into this new reality, a child of hope and hardship. Adam looked at his son, this tiny miracle, and saw a continuation of life, a reason to press on. Sometime later, another cry joined the first. They named him Abel. His name was more fragile, meaning breath or vapor, a hint of the fleeting nature of life in this new world. The boys grew under a sky that was no longer just a canopy for a garden, but a vast, indifferent expanse. Adam taught them how to survive. He showed Cain how to read the seasons, how to break the earth with a hoe, and how to coax life from the soil. Cain grew strong, his shoulders broad and his hands stained with the dirt he worked. He was intense, focused, and saw the world in terms of effort and reward. The sweat on his brow was a testament to his labor, and the harvest he gathered was his tangible proof of success. He loved the feeling of the sun on his back and the solid weight of grain in his hands. This land was his to conquer. Abel, on the other hand, was drawn to the living, breathing creatures that roamed the hills. He became a shepherd, a keeper of flocks. He learned the language of the wind and the habits of his sheep. Unlike Cain's solitary struggle with the earth, Abel's life was one of constant motion and quiet companionship. He was gentler, more contemplative. He would sit for hours, watching his flock, his gaze often drifting to the heavens, as if searching for that lost connection his parents spoke of in hushed, sorrowful tones. While Cain fought against the earth, Abel moved with it, guiding and protecting his flock. The two brothers, born of the same parents, were as different as the land and the sky. Cain's world was the ground beneath his feet, the tangible result of his own strength. Abel's world was the open range, the well-being of the creatures in his care. In their youth, this difference was just a simple fact of their lives. They would share their meals at the end of the day, Cain smelling of soil and sweat, Abel of wool and open air. Cain would talk of the blight that threatened his crops, and Abel would speak of a newborn lamb or a wolf he'd chased away from the flock. They loved each other, as brothers do, but a subtle distance began to grow between them, like a crack in dry earth. It wasn't born of malice, not at first. It was born of their different natures. Cain, the farmer, saw his worth in what he could produce. His identity was tied to the fruits of his labor. Abel, the shepherd, found his purpose in nurturing life. His worth was in his watchfulness and care. As they matured into men, this difference began to manifest in how they approached the divine. They had both heard the stories of Eden, of the God who walked with their parents. They knew they were supposed to honor this distant creator. Cain, ever the pragmatist, believed that a portion of his hard-won harvest, the very best of his crops, was a fitting tribute. It was the product of his own hands, his own sweat. What better gift could there be? Abel, watching his flock, felt a different kind of connection. He saw the cycle of life and death every day. He understood that life was precious, a gift, and so he chose to offer one of the firstborn of his flock, its finest and fattest portions. It wasn't just a product, it was a life, a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice, a recognition of the giver of all life. This unspoken divergence in their understanding of sacrifice and worship began to create a quiet tension. Cain, looking at his brother's flock, sometimes felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Abel's work seemed easier. The sheep multiplied on their own, guided by a gentle hand. His own work was a constant battle against weeds, drought, and pests. A seed of resentment, tiny and unnoticed, was planted in Cain's heart. He saw Abel's peaceful contemplation and mistook it for a lack of effort. He saw his own grueling labor as more worthy, more real. The stage was being set. Two brothers, two paths, two different hearts preparing to make an offering. They both sought to connect with the God they had never seen, but their methods, born from their very souls, were fundamentally at odds. The air grew heavier with unspoken comparisons and a budding rivalry that neither of them acknowledged. They were standing at a crossroads, unaware that one path led to acceptance and the other to a darkness that would stain the earth forever and echo through all of human history. The first family, born of exile, was about to face its first and most devastating fracture. Cain's heart was a furnace of anger, stoked by the winds of jealousy. He watched his brother Abel, whose offerings were met with favor, and a shadow fell over his own spirit. He couldn't grasp it, couldn't understand why the divine smile seemed to shine on Abel and not on him. Every time he witnessed Abel's simple, honest joy, the bitterness in his own soul grew, twisting into a thorny vine that choked the light. He saw his own reflection and saw only a man scorned, a brother overshadowed. The world, which once felt wide and full of promise, now seemed to shrink, containing only him and the burning question, why not me? His face grew heavy, his posture stooped, carrying the invisible weight of resentment. The smoke from his altar seemed to cling to the ground, a gray testament to his inner turmoil, while the smoke from Abel's rose straight and true to the heavens. It was a constant, visual reminder of his perceived failure. This wasn't just disappointment, it was a profound, soul-deep wound. He began to avoid his brother's gaze, finding it impossible to share in his happiness. Instead, he would retreat into himself, into the cold, dark corners of his mind where envy whispered its poisonous lies. The fields, the sky, the very air they breathed felt different now, tainted by the growing darkness within him. Then, in the midst of his brooding silence, a voice broke through, not from the wind or the earth, but from a place beyond. It was the Lord, speaking directly to the heart of Cain's pain. "Why are you so angry?" the voice asked, with a tone not of condemnation, but of deep concern. "Why is your face downcast, filled with such despair?" The question hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into his sea of resentment. It was an invitation to look inward, to confront the storm raging within him. The divine presence was not distant, it was near, seeking to understand, to guide. The voice continued, laying bare the choice that stood before him, a crossroads for his soul. "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Your spirit will be lifted, your face will shine again." It was a promise of restoration, a path back to the light. The way forward was simple, choose goodness, but with the promise came a stark and urgent warning. "But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door." The image was terrifying, a predator, patient and hungry, waiting for a moment of weakness. It desires to have you, to consume you completely. But you, the voice commanded with a mix of hope and gravity, you must master it. You must rule over it. The choice was his. The power to overcome was within his grasp. He could rise above the envy, cast off the bitterness, and find acceptance not through sacrifice alone, but through righteousness. Or he could open the door and let the beast in. This was Cain's moment of truth. Would he heed the divine counsel, or would he surrender to the shadow that longed to possess him? The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of his decision, a decision that would not only shape his destiny, but echo through all of time. But Cain's ears were deaf to the wisdom from above. His heart, now a fortress of pride and resentment, refused to let the voice of truth enter. The whisper of envy had become a roar, drowning out all else. He had nurtured the serpent of jealousy for so long that its hiss was the only sound he trusted. The divine warning to master the sin at his door was ignored. Instead, Cain began to conspire with it, to see it not as a predator, but as an ally, a tool to reclaim what he felt was rightfully his. He chose the shadow. He chose the rage. The path back to the light, once so clear, was now obscured by the storm he refused to calm. He looked at Abel, not as a brother, but as the source of his misery. The love they had once shared was now a distant memory, buried beneath layers of bitterness. He conceived a plan, born of the darkness he had embraced. Hiding his turmoil behind a hollow smile, he approached his unsuspecting brother. "Brother," he called out, his voice a mask for the tempest in his soul. "Come with me. Let us walk in the field." Abel, whose heart knew no such deceit, saw only his brother and agreed without hesitation. He trusted Cain. He saw no predator lurking behind his brother's eyes. And so, they walked together into the vast open fields. The sun cast long shadows from the tall blades of grass, which swayed gently in the breeze. For a moment, a profound and heavy silence fell over the world, as if nature itself was holding its breath, sensing the tragedy about to unfold. They walked deeper into the quiet expanse, away from the altars, away from the familiar sights of their home. In that quiet, Abel turned to his brother, perhaps to share a thought, a smile. But the face he saw was not the one he knew. It was a mask of cold fury, a stranger's face. In that instant, the predator at Cain's door lunged. The rage he had nurtured, the envy he had fed, consumed him completely. The divine warning to master it was forgotten, trampled under the stampede of his violent emotions. He was no longer a brother, a farmer, a man. He was an instrument of the sin he had refused to conquer. He struck Abel. The trust in Abel's eyes shattered, replaced by a fleeting moment of shock and betrayal, before his light was extinguished forever. The first act of violence between brothers stained the earth, a horrific testament to the destructive power of a heart that chooses darkness over light. The silence that followed was deeper, heavier than before. It was the silence of a life stolen, of a bond irrevocably broken. The tall grass, once golden, now seemed to bear witness to the horror, its blades spattered with the innocent blood of Abel. And that blood did not stay silent. It seeped into the soil, crying out not with a sound that could be heard by human ears, but with a voice that pierced the very fabric of creation. It was a lament, a cry of injustice and sorrow that rose from the ground itself. It was a cry that reached the heavens, a cry that God could not ignore. The earth itself mourned the loss of the righteous shepherd, its surface forever marked by this first, terrible murder. The shadow of Cain's jealousy had finally fallen, and it was long and dark indeed. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to our channel for more content that explores the depths of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue to create these stories. Stay reflective, and we'll see you in the next video.